Hey everyone, welcome to the Upstream Ag Insights video audio edition for the week of July 26th. Looking forward to talking a little bit today about some of my favorite pieces or components of Upstream Ag Insights. My name is Shane Thomas. We're going to start first off with FBN's expansion and acquisition in Australia. So they actually acquired or purchased Farmsave, which has 5,000 members in Australia already, in addition to the 12,000 or so members that FBN has in North America. And I think this is a pretty good acquisition and a pretty good entry. For one, it's smart just in terms of going into a new culture, new country, just to be able to better understand that market and the customers by going in there, getting some staff that have already been on the ground, understand the dynamics, understand the marketplace. So I think that's really a smart component. But when I look at this from a more macro and a broad perspective, some of the things to consider is just Australia is heavy in generics. And so when you look at Australia, moving into Australia, when you look at that compared to Canada and the US, where Canada doesn't have a high usage of generics, US a little bit higher than Canada, or quite a bit higher than Canada, but lower than Australia. And with some of the back and forth going on between the major manufacturers and FBN, this actually might be beneficial for them, just in the sense that they can go in there with their generic product lines and be able to go in where customers are comfortable using generics already, which isn't quite the same as in Canada today, for example. Another thing is you look at who has major market share. Nutrien and Elders have significant market share down there, and so having another retailer, somebody to purchase crop inputs from, might be welcomed in that Australian marketplace. Their season's not as tight as Canada or the US, where you get, call it that 4, maybe 5 months sort of thing, but really that tight 2-3 month time frame where there's crop inputs going down. So that's a little bit of a time constraint in North America for FBN with their direct distribution model. And so that might be a little bit of a benefit with a more widespread growing season in Australia. And then plain and simple, more scale. So they're purchasing all these different active ingredients and AIs from all different parts, whether it's China or India or wherever. This allows them to increase their scale, acquire more profitably, or formulate more profitably. And so that means, likely anyways, lower prices for farmers in the crop input space, which is what's attracting a lot of their members to their business today. And so that's an interesting one to keep on. You look at them expanding down into Brazil or Latin America. There's already quite a few different marketplaces down there. So I really do think Australia was a good move for them. Moving on, I won't go too deep into this. I think I get pretty heavy into this every other week, it seems like, but I read a post on LinkedIn that was just basically stating that is e-commerce the only way to go digital in ag retail? And I think the answer is an overwhelming no. There's so many different components and ways to be able to go digital, and it doesn't include just e-commerce, and it doesn't even necessarily include e-commerce all the time. And I think that's something that needs to be talked about. There's artificial intelligence to help manage your supply chain. There's digital agronomy tools, virtual connectivity to inform your customers. There's really endless opportunities. And so I go through some of the thought process in this week's edition, just being able to identify who is your core customer, what do they value? And I think being able to identify what they value and what is value is very important for not only retails today, but specifically retails in terms of determining what are they going to do in the marketplace? What is their strategy going to look like? And how are they going to execute on that? And I think people look at digital strategy and e-commerce strategy, and to me, that's not a strategy. Those are components of your overarching strategy. They are enablers of strategy. They are something that needs to be used as a lever within your strategy. And I think that is something that gets misconstrued often, not just in agriculture and ag retail, but all over the place. So I think one of my solutions, or not solutions, but one of my comments here is that I don't think anybody's going to be successful as a retailer simply checking a box and doing an e-commerce offering as a website. That's not going to drive business for customers or acquiring customers and driving their business. I think it needs to be looked at more holistically. It needs to be looked at from how are they going to be organizing their entire company, how are they allocating capital. All these different components need to be fit into this entire strategy, and how digital and technology fits into that needs to be considered. One of the more exciting topics this week that I think in the industry in general, but specifically what I talked about in Upstream, Bayer launches a carbon capture program for farmers in the US and Brazil. And there's a lot to carbon and carbon capture, carbon sequestration, carbon credits. I think this one's pretty interesting. Just they've been talking about it for a few years now, but finally going into the marketplace with this. And there was something I read saying that this would offer farmers something like $13 an acre based on reducing tillage and going to different cover crops. And so that's something to keep in mind. But I think more broadly speaking, and how this progresses, how does their business be successful in this? How does this benefit their business? And there's a number of different ways that it will benefit their business. I think when we start to look at their investment in biologicals, because a lot of what these carbon credits are is, do you change a practice within your season to produce that crop in a way that decreases your greenhouse gas emissions or increases carbon sequestration, for example. And so you start to look at biologicals, being able to manage your nitrogen application amounts, because we have nitrogen gases that are released. And so if you can utilize nitrogen fixing biologicals, you can decrease the amount of nitrogen emissions, which in turn means less total greenhouse gas emissions. And so you look at Leaps by Bayer, which is their venture portfolio. They have 3 or 4 organizations within that corporate venture arm of their business. They have a joint venture with Ginkgo Bioworks, which is a multi-billion-dollar valuation company. And so pretty interesting there. You start to look at even their GMOs and breeding. I highlighted something last week that I'll just read it verbatim, but farmers who planted genetically modified crops increased their incomes by almost 19 billion in 2018 and reduced carbon emissions by 23 billion kilograms, or the equivalent of removing 15.3 million cars from the roads that year. So I talked briefly about baseline. And so when you look at North America and Brazil, 96, 98, 99%, very high amounts, whether you're talking canola, whether you're talking soy, whether you're talking corn, are already GM. And so when you have a baseline of using those already, maybe not a lot of opportunity, but Bayer's going to be expanding these carbon components to beyond just Brazil and North America. And so when you start to look at the opportunity for their business in GMOs and breeding, pretty significant opportunity. Even touch on their short stature corn, because all of a sudden you have less amount of foliage, less amount of organic material on the land. Can you manage the need for tillage a little bit better too? So there's lots of different moving parts in here. And then there's even the digital. You need to be on FieldView to qualify for this. You need to be utilizing FieldView, and so that means more data, more acres for them. But the thing that's interesting too is that they're actually going to be utilizing Climate FieldView and even remote sensing technology, so satellites and that sort of thing, to be able to verify the data and the practices used, which I think is significant because that means that they can execute on that at a lower cost than other people might be able to in the marketplace. They can also apply modeling, for example, in terms of nitrogen applications in season. They can manage fungicide applications. Again, these are all extra passes, extra amounts of inputs. And so it's all about being able to manage that ratio of emissions to the output of grains. So pretty interesting. Not to mention the monetization component of carbon. What's that revenue share going to look like? How do they actually hedge in the marketplace with these carbon markets? So lots of interesting moving parts there. I think that we'll be watching a lot moving forward. I think the last thing I'll touch on is Taranis, which is an Israeli organization, raised their Series C at 30 million, or a $30 million Series C, which brings their total fundraise to 60 million. And so they're doing some interesting things with artificial intelligence and really high resolution imagery. And they're primarily using drones, but they're also getting into satellite imagery and airplane imagery, these sorts of things. And I think what I start to touch on is just, are these organizations drone companies, or are they ultimately organizations that capture data and deliver insights? And I think when you start to look at all these different groups, everybody's trying to get to the same point. And what that is essentially being able to deliver actionable insights from the data collected and processed to deliver better outcomes to farmers. And so it doesn't matter if you're using a drone, doesn't matter if you're using a satellite, doesn't matter if you're using various other sensors. What matters is what you're able to deliver and what that outcome actually is. And you see other companies doing this as well, whether it's Evron UAS, a Canadian organization, Hummingbird Technologies out of the UK. And so I think this is an interesting thing to think about as we start to look at tech companies moving forward. And really it's about, what's going to differentiate these companies now. And to me, it's their ability to deliver profitable outcomes for farmers. And so this is going to come down to unique business models. So how are you actually being able to add value to the farmer, and how are you capturing some component of that value? Is it through a unique way of sharing in revenue, or how are you utilizing machine learning and data analytics capabilities, starting not only agronomic decisions, but even as we start to talk about the carbon, for example, that I just touched on, how can you utilize that technology to verify carbon practices and execute on those sorts of things? So pretty interesting topic there, I think, as well. I'm going to touch on a number of different components. There's 2Q2 or H1 releases this week in terms of profitability and reporting for publicly traded companies. So I go over Yara, which has some interesting information in it, Syngenta as well. So I think there's a lot of different interesting components surrounding Upstream this week. I'm pretty excited about hearing some of the feedback from everybody and looking forward to all of the commentary that we do end up seeing coming in. So thanks to everybody for listening, and looking forward to hearing your thoughts and comments moving forward.